Good morning, welcome to Headline Focus here live on Core Politics with me, Rob Double. It is Monday the 18th of June 2018. Let's have a look at what's making the political news to start off the week. And this is going to be one which probably runs well into the week and indeed probably dominates the week as well, which is a big announcement which the Prime Minister is making today in a big speech regarding the NHS. By 2023, an extra £20 billion a year for the NHS on top of inflation, so that's real terms increase, is basically been announced, but it's going to be announced formally by the Prime Minister. That's roughly 3.4% a year on average over the next 5 years. Now this is to mark or to help commemorate, it comes at the same time as the 70th anniversary of the NHS, so a big moment and indeed a big policy to come with it. Now, whilst it is significant and it is a significant amount of money, quite interesting as well if you have a look at the previous spending of governments, particularly over the past previous governments all the way back to Blair, Brown and Major and Thatcher, you'll actually see, interestingly enough, that the amount being promised here, the 3.4%, isn't actually that much relative in the perspective of previous governments. However, in the terms of the austerity of the Cameron and the coalition governments, it will be a welcome break and certainly a huge injection of cash for the NHS at a time where a huge amount of commentary over NHS budgeting and provision has been a big concern and certainly on the political agenda. Now, there comes with caveats. The NHS must come up with a 10-year plan to best use its £20 billion funding boost in England. There's also funding for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales as well. The NHS must tackle also waste, reduce bureaucracy and eliminate unexpected variation. That's also something the Prime Minister is reported to be emphasising in her speech today as well. The two key points, and you'll see actually in the national press it's got mixed responses, is because of how it's been packaged up and how it's being paid for. Now, one thing the Prime Minister has emphasised is the Brexit dividend effect. So money that's coming back from the EU will help pay for money to the NHS. Now, this is a politically maybe not a toxic issue, but it's certainly highly contentious because the whole £350 a week pledge of the Vote Leave campaign on the side, big sign on the side of the red bus during the referendum. We've already had the chair of the Health and Social Care Committee, who's of course a Conservative, Sarah Wollaston, saying the idea of a Brexit dividend is tosh, and indeed there's been much backlash against the whole idea of some kind of validation for the Vote Leave campaign over the NHS pledge in terms of this government policy, particularly The Guardian leading on that as well. But also there is something coming from the more right side of the papers and indeed the right side of the political spectrum as well, which is more to do with tax. How is this going to be paid for? The Brexit dividend will not likely, or rather is not going to be able to pay for this massive increase in the NHS on its own, so it's going to have to happen through tax and through borrowing as well, or one of the two, or a variation of both. Now, the stealth tax, there's been reports that an income tax and national insurance thresholds will be frozen in the coming years, so in the hope of raising some more tax money. The Telegraph calling this a stealth tax, the Times saying there's a black hole of about £11 billion in this pledge, the Sun saying that this is a broken tax pledge by the Conservatives, so really quite a hostile response in terms of the idea of raising tax to pay for the NHS. Another element as well, which hasn't been reported on as much, is the reality that for councils, they've noted that there's going to be no provision in this budget for social care. This budget is going to be applied for frontline NHS services like hospitals, GPs and mental health care. The Prime Minister has made a big thing of mental health care and wanting to extend the provision on it. That's going to be an interesting bit of commentary that will likely come through as well over the next few days. And also the reality is Jeremy Hunt has had a very good time, the Health Secretary, because he's got a massive budget increase. But what does this mean for the Chancellor behind number 11 in terms of looking after the purse strings and of course looking after public spending? If he's committed this huge amount to the health service, what's to stop the defence budget? What's to stop the housing budget? What's to stop the policing budget suddenly needing to be increased as well? There's an idea of perhaps this is the end of Philip Hammond's responsible budgeting, not wanting to spend too much, wanting to keep the purse of the UK in good order. This is going to put more political pressure on him, certainly from other departments, to be spending as well. A lot of factors here in this story, but certainly this is a big announcement for today and probably as well this week. Next up, though, back to Brexit land. The EU bans Brexit Aviation Planning. Now, this is a story coming through that the European Commission has said it will not discuss a no-deal aviation contingency plan before March next year, when, of course, the UK leaves the EU. Now, it's stopped also aviation regulators from holding backstop talks with Britain. That's basically the regulators have said we would like to have some planning in order to ensure that in a no-deal scenario, planes are still able to fly to the UK and from the UK to Europe, and there isn't much disruption. Now, according to reports, the Commission has explicitly banned the European Aviation Safety Agency from talking to the UK Civil Aviation Authority. Now, explicitly banned as in you cannot be going to planning, you cannot be putting in contingency plans alongside the UK in the case of no-deal Brexit. Now, this is particularly concerning because airlines, manufacturers, regulators across Europe have said they'd need about 9 months of planning in order to ensure that there is some smooth transition, or rather there is minimal disturbance in a no-deal scenario. And of course, the European Commission is not allowing that space, that breathing room to make those plans. Now, why are they doing this? There's a huge amount of criticism coming through, or rather a large amount, that this is, politics above people. The idea that they're using this to leverage against the UK in negotiations to put more pressure on the government to take a deal, so to avoid a no-deal scenario. But the criticism there is, well, you're doing that at the expense of being happy, at least in principle, for there to be a huge amount of disruption for people, both European and UK people's lives, in terms of aircraft travel, in terms of aviation, in terms of manufacturing as well, which rely on supply chains across continents, across seas, in order to achieve their results in terms of production. This is quite an interesting story, similar to the Galileo project over the satellite controversy, and probably an example here of the European Commission playing slightly more underhand tactics in negotiations in terms of wanting to leverage as much as possible their power over the UK in terms of negotiating position. No doubt more lines on this again later on today. And finally, the withdrawal bill is back in the House of Lords. Now, it was there, as you remember, last week, and indeed the defeats from the government, which brought it back to the Commons. The government and the Commons then voted down most of the Lords' amendments, which they tagged onto the withdrawal bill. They're now back to the Lords, and it looks like most of what was voted down by the government and indeed by the Commons is going back to the Lords and will be voted back through to go back to the Commons. So this is the ping-pong cycle of legislation in Parliament. The big one is former Tory Cabinet Minister Lord Hailsham is reportedly retabling Dominic Grieve's original amendment. This is the one over the meaningful vote, which is the process of a meaningful vote. Got a little fire alarm here going on. And this idea of the meaningful vote giving Parliament the ability in a no-deal scenario to be able to basically take control of the Brexit negotiations. Now, rumour has it there's some kind of amended version going through which can be put forward by Lord Hailsham. That's unconfirmed as of yet. But it's going to be no surprise, expect later on today to see that the government has been defeated again in the House of Lords over these amendments. They're going to go back to the Commons to be debated on again. Whether the government this time round is going to be able to win the day, win the argument back in the Commons, particularly over the meaningful vote, will yet to be seen, but certainly this is something for your agenda a little bit later on. That's pretty much it for today, and indeed this week you're up to date. Don't forget you can find all the latest on what we're doing here on Core Politics on our Facebook page and Twitter right here. But from me and all the team here at Core London, sorry about the fire alarm, but see you again tomorrow about 9 o'clock.